What kind of future is now in front of me? How does this change things? And how does it change me? Most challenging of all, getting diagnosed with a chronic or terminal illness can usher in an identity earthquake. Pivotal parts of your identity, like your physical appearance, your career, your contribution to your family, basically your ability to do things, are all called into question as you're now given a new label, a sick person. But by strengthening your connection to others and your self connection, you can reclaim your identity.
Welcome to Living Well with MS. This show comes to you from Overcoming MS, the world's leading multiple sclerosis healthy lifestyle charity, which helps people live a full and healthy life through the Overcoming MS program. We interview a range of experts and people with multiple sclerosis. Please remember, all opinions expressed are their own. Receive monthly tips and ideas about living well with MS by signing up for our newsletter at overcomingms.org/newsletter. And now, let's meet our guest.
Welcome to the latest edition of the Living Well with MS podcast. Joining me on this edition is Brenda Snow. Brenda has MS, but has written a book which actually covers more than just MS, which is Diagnosed, the Essential Guide to Navigating the Patient's Journey, with an asterisk, with swear words. So I have read some of this book, and I would say don't worry too much. It's not heavily sweary. It's more like if you're talking to a friend. That's what it came across to me. It was that sort of phrasing. It's like you're talking to a friend. Yeah, very good. I think mostly for newly diagnosed people, I think it would be really useful and goes through the processes of how you accept a diagnosis. So welcome, Brenda Snow.
Hi, thanks for having me, Jeff. I'm happy to be here from this side of the pond.
Yes. So, well, we have people from all over the world on the podcast, as
Yes.
listeners. So, yeah. So firstly, could you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your MS journey?
Sure. Well, like you said, my name is Brenda, and I've been living with MS for 30 years now. And my journey started off when I was a young single mom, and I started having a lot of strange symptoms. So I started having loss of bladder, like just would lose control. There's a scene in the book when I'm at the department store and my little daughter asks me why urine's running down my leg. Yeah. So everybody's probably had these embarrassing moments. I started not being able to feel my left leg and my left foot. And I think the thing that was the most challenging is, I knew something was wrong. So, a really key message for me in this book is listen to your inner voice, everybody, even if you've had MS for a long time or any other life-changing, life-altering illness. And I was basically dismissed by the medical community early on. I was told it was because I had had a baby, although my baby was 5. I was told I was suffering headaches. I was told ultimately the most devastating part of my journey was I was told that I had a severe form of mental illness and all these symptoms were manifesting itself. So early on in my journey with MS was very overwhelming, devastating, depressing. But a lot of those things that happened to me early on are ultimately, why I went on to be an entrepreneur. They're why I've written this book. Because if it just can help one person, I never want anybody to feel like I felt or be not validated when you're having really tough health moments in your life. Some of the new statistics are 50% of populations are going to have, a life-altering, life-changing diagnosis. So that's a hell of a lot of people, isn't it? So hopefully this book helps you navigate those tough times.
And you were diagnosed in the 90s, was it?
I was.
Yeah.
I was.
So quite
In the
different
dark
times as well.
ages.
And so could you tell us a bit about your work as a patient authority and also founding Snow companies?
Yes, I would be happy to. So, after spending the first couple of years of my journey, after I was finally diagnosed by a lovely woman neurologist who indeed told me I wasn't crazy. I'm sure there's people that, maybe would debate that point. But no, in all seriousness, she said, you're very sick. You do have multiple sclerosis and we need to put you in the hospital today. So I spent a number of months in a wheelchair. I spent probably the better part of a year with the walker, and then probably another better part of the year with a cane. And on my journey, using lots of different modalities. So I did receive the first FDA approved drug, which had been approved in the UK before. So people that were living in the UK had access to it before I did. But I also was doing tons of physical therapy, occupational therapy, meeting with a neuropsychologist. So I think there was a lot of pieces of my pie. I never want to tell people living with a chronic condition, it's just this one thing, right?
Hmm.
There's enough snake oil salesmen out there. It was a lot of, and it was a lot of hard work. That was no joke. But as I was sitting in my kitchen one day, and I was living in California at the time, trying to put this diluent in a cake. And, I had optic neuritis. I had lost my vision in my left eye. I thought to myself, the people that made this drug, which was, a good option for me, clearly never talked to an MS patient. And that's turned out to be fact. And that's kind of where the impetus and the ideas started for snow companies. So I was sort of the first person in the United States to disrupt the life science industry. So biotech companies were not really doing anything to support the patient, ultimately the people who take the medication. And I know our health systems are different, but to me, that seemed absurd when I was going to live with something for the rest of my life, unless there was a cure, and I needed to potentially look at taking a therapy for the rest of my life. Why in the world were these companies and organizations not showing up for patients in a more meaningful way? And that was really why I started Snow Companies. And, over the last 25 years, grew it to a very important, I would think, important organization. I just 2 weeks ago stepped back in my role as CEO. So it's time for other people to drive it into the future. But as a founder and a business owner and an entrepreneur, it was an amazing experience and ride too. Incredible. And I got to meet the most amazing patients all over the world. I mean, I've worked in the UK, I've worked all over Europe, Asia, Australia, and with so many different chronic illnesses. And if you'll indulge me this one point, I do want to say, I'll never forget sitting in China and Japan and places where I didn't even remotely speak the language, had no even basic understanding of the language. And they did not have multiple sclerosis. They had one type of a diagnosis of a cancer, another one of a seizure disorder. And I will never forget, through translation, sitting there hugging and crying together with people, because this connection and this commonality, when you live with a life changing illness, it transcends race, language, socioeconomics. And that was just so profound to me. And it was one of I know that we helped people, but I can't tell you how much that helped me. And that's why I believe in the power of narrative storytelling as well.
And it's a good story in the book, actually, when you go to the pharma company and ask about their dealings with patients, and they just say, well, they'd never spoken to a patient before.
Correct. I
And you
had
think,
three heads, right? Yeah.
yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
So, mentioned already, you've recently written the book. So it's Diagnose, the Essential Guide to Navigating the Patient's Journey. And there will be links in the show notes, definitely.
Thank you.
So could you tell us a bit about the process of writing the book and what the book's about and who it's for?
Yeah, I will. So the process of writing a book over my career, most of the times after I was working with patients and meeting caregivers and their family members, people would say, you should write a book. And in all honesty, it sounded great. I was intimidated by the process and I didn't have any time. I was scaling a business. And so as I've looked toward this next sort of season of my life, I thought, okay. And the pandemic hit, everybody's in their houses paranoid and freaked out. I was like, maybe this is the time that I should try it. So I will just say, I appreciate the comment that it's written like a friend is talking to you. That's because that's how I wrote it. I am not, let's say, Ernest Hemingway. So I actually sat down And after I kind of put the framework together and I hired an amazing coach, Greta Meyer, to kind of help me think about all those parts, then I just spoke the book and spoke all the things that I felt I wish I had had 30 years ago when I was diagnosed. All the advice, all the perspectives from other patients in this book, sort of the natural progression of maybe emotions and things that are going to come up that is going to, yeah, be really hard. And so then after I got that down, then I went back to the writing process and made revisions and made changes and then sent it to a publisher. And so from soup to nuts, it was probably just short of a 3-year process. I wasn't like, really hurrying. And honestly, I didn't think I was going to do anything with the book. So when it came out, and I've got the advanced copies, I was really, and I've heard this from other authors where they have that incredible, anxiety about, no, it's terrible. I don't want anybody to read it. And even though I talk a lot about vulnerability in the book and having courageous conversations, I still had that moment where I was like, shit, I don't think I want anybody to read this. And then I handed it out to people that I, really kind of trusted their opinion. And some were patients, some were caregivers, some were just good friends. And I started getting like a lot of really positive feedback. And they said, you're nuts, Brenda. You have to really make an effort with this. It will help so many. And I'm just very humbled. That has actually been the response. The reviews have been great. The emails I've received have been super touching. I've spent many nights with tears going down my face, like, oh, I'm so glad it meant something to somebody. So the writing process was tough, but I think the end result has been positive.
And on that, would you do us a favor of reading an excerpt so listeners can get a sense of
I can do that. So let me put on my glasses. They work better. So, yeah, so just to kind of sort of set it up a little bit, I think the first half of the book, I really address sort of the emotional roller coaster you and your friends and your family and your loved ones are going to go through. So, like, what's going on with me pre-diagnosis. Then you get the diagnosis. Then the grieving process is intense. Then there's anger. Then how do you get to a place of acceptance? And in the second half of the book, then I talk about from moving from acceptance, how do you endure this, the resiliency you need for the rest of your life, connecting with yourself, optimizing your care, and ultimately ending with, again, what is your sort of opportunity to use your experiences to make an impact on yourself and others, and make sure that you understand that you have an incredible legacy to leave. That's sort of how the book flows. And I'll start off here in chapter 3, which is the diagnosis chapter. So I will just do maybe a page and a half. Leverage the power of connectivity to ride out an identity earthquake. And I'll say I've been doing a lot of press on this identity earthquake. Here we go. The journey to diagnosis can be brutal and cause you to question your own sanity. If and when a diagnosis finally comes, there can be some relief since, thank goodness, there's finally a name for what is happening to you. But there's also fear. You're confronted with questions you never wanted to consider. What does this mean? What kind of future is now in front of me? How does this change things? And how does it change me? Most challenging of all, getting diagnosed with a chronic or terminal illness can usher in an identity earthquake. Pivotal parts of your identity, like your physical appearance, your career, your contribution to your family, basically your ability to do things, are all called into question as you're now given a new label, a sick person. But by strengthening your connection to others and your self-connection, you can reclaim your identity in the midst of this diagnosis stage. Although it will be challenging, it's crucial to trust your instincts and stand confidently on what you know to be true. This will only help you as the going gets rough, and it'll help pave a way for a profound transformation. That's kind of the opening paragraph of the book. I think there's funny parts in here. I fancy myself maybe next to go do a stand-up act. I don't know. Wait for it. So there's parts in here that I think will make you laugh out loud. There's definitely parts in here you will go, that happened to me. I understand this. I think there's parts in the book that will make you cry, but I think the whole book is approachable. It's really written like we're sitting down over a cup of tea, just talking like, just like you do in your home or with your friends, your mates at a pub. Maybe I'd be at the pub.
And so you've broken down the patient's journey. So it starts with pre-diagnosis, and
Yes.
that's often overlooked by patients and healthcare providers because before diagnosis, there's healthcare providers are not really involved. So, could you tell us a bit about that pre-diagnosis phase?
Yeah, well, I think, that's the phase that really conjures up a lot of fear and anxiety and also denial, right? So, there's something going on. You're not exactly quite right. Something's happening. And it's easy to be like, I'm tired. I'm not going to pay attention to that. Because let's face it, nobody wants to get a diagnosis of one of these things, do they? It's not like, oh, yay, I was diagnosed with lupus today. Nobody wants to hear these words. But if you ignore the pre diagnosis phase, you're delaying help. And time is of the essence when you have a life changing disease. So it's really important that you're vigilant in this pre diagnosis stage. It's important that you don't poo poo yourself and say it's nothing and just chalk it up to, bad day, not enough sleep. I always tell people there's so much power in listening to your inner voice. And I mean, I just had something this week. There was a little place on my cheek. And I was like, that doesn't seem right. It popped up like, a few weeks ago. And I was immediately getting it biopsied. So only because I've had these experiences that I didn't just say, oh, it's probably just normal part of skin and aging. So listen to your inner voice. If it doesn't seem right, it probably isn't. And make sure you're diligent about getting that appointment. Like we were talking about earlier, Jeff, no matter where we live today, I think that healthcare is stressed. And sometimes getting into a specialist can take months. So you already have too much of a lead time there, right? It's not like you can have your first symptom and get into a
Mhm.
specialist tomorrow. So, book that appointment, go in and find out what the heck is wrong with you. Because I always say, you can't take the first step forward in your journey until you get a name for what you have. And as I write in the book, that was a really brutal day for me, but it was also a really good day because at that point in time, once it was named, then I knew solutions could start to be looked at. I didn't know what the hell they were, but at least I knew if it's got a name, then we can start to talk about the next stage.
And what would be your recommendation for getting an accurate diagnosis as quickly as possible?
Well, this is also a tough one, right? Because you don't feel good. And so this is the time where you have to be, almost like a bull in a china shop, right? You have to be relentless. You have to work the phones. You've got to be on your patient portal, whatever it is in your specific region. So it's a lot of times it's fighting. It's literally fighting to be seen. So you kind of have to have endurance. I always say there is somebody that loves you and wants to help. And I have seen over the years working with tens of thousands of patients, one of the things we're not very good at is actually asking for help. So enlist yourself, your circle of people that love you and care about you that are happy to sit on wait times and help get you in to that physician. Sometimes sending over, I call it a pre-read. So once you have that appointment booked, they may or may not have the chance to look at it, but visits are also short. So sending over what's been going on with you as a background or document has been a successful tip for some people. And making sure that when you're in that doctor's appointment, you have an extra set of ears. A lot of information is coming at you. And as you know, you live with MS too. Sometimes cognitive impairment can be a real issue. And a lot of incoming information just might be overload. So have somebody attend that appointment with you so that you can go back and say, was I tracking on this? Or, oh, you heard something different. It'll help making your plan, I think, a little bit easier.
You mentioned the grief phase previously.
Yeah.
So you noted that a common cycle with patients with chronic illness starts with grief. So could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I can, and I think that's one, too, along with endurance. These aren't linear. It's not like when you finish grief and you go to anger, you never come back to grief again. I've had MS for 30 years, and there's times that, it's normal that you grieve, on really hot days, and if the humidity is high and my people want to go out and do something really sporty, that's not something that I can join in on. And there is still a little bit of grief. It's like, well, everybody else can do it, but not me. But that's a normal feeling. And I don't stay in that place anymore. I think what the book will help you do is recognize the emotion and teach you how to move through it more effectively. So grief, I think early on for the people that are just out there getting diagnosed now, it's really common to be in a place of, what is my life going to be like? What does this mean for my goals and my dreams? I'm not going to have them. They're all going to go away. Am I going to be able to take care of myself or my family? And I think the one thing that I want to tell you is it will be okay. It will be okay. It does not seem like it in the grief stage, but it will. And all the things that you thought you're losing, they actually weren't a given anyways. They hadn't happened yet. So remember that as you take ownership and have agency with your chronic, life changing, altering diagnosis, that there still is, when you feel like you've lost control and you've lost the power, you still have it. And it'll make working through grief and anger a lot easier if you can keep that in the back of your mind, because you're going to lose confidence. You're going to be down on yourself. So I used to tell a lot of the young kids that work for me, fake it till you make it. This might be a great, great time to do that too. Believe in yourself.
And so then you move into anger then. So from grief, you move to the anger phase. So
Yeah.
what's the
Yeah.
anger phase for people with chronic illness? Because
Pissed
this is the
off.
sort of grief like analogy, isn't it? But
Yeah.
obviously no one's died, so we're kind of grieving our former selves, aren't we? I guess.
You are grieving your former self. That's right. And the idea of what you think that was or could be. And then I think, I've heard it a million times. Why me? Why did this happen to me? I'm so angry about it. Why did that happen to my wife or to my mom or my husband? And it's very normal. I think that's the best word to say, to feel angry or to feel like, you didn't deserve this. Nobody does. Nobody does. Nobody deserves this stuff. And so getting angry for me channeled a little bit of action. So after I got through the being angry and mad at the world and pissed off about everything and being a little bit of a martyr too, normal. Then I was like, okay, this is going to rot like the best garden. Like if you have the most beautiful garden and you have the most terrible weeds, the weeds are going to win at that point. I was like, I have to pick this ugly weed out of my soul, or I'm going to stay this very angry, unhappy person. And I didn't want to be that. So again, kind of own this anger, and I would say harness it for action. And for me, that was my care plan. So am I going to take a therapy? Am I going to do rehabilitation? Am I going to ever go back and have employment? What does that look like? How am I going to show up for my small child? So I really used that anger to laser focus on my plan. And as I did that, the anger sort of dissipated. And again, I could move into that next stage of acceptance.
So yeah, that's what I was going to come on to. So
Yeah.
that's getting to the good parts now. If you're moving from anger to acceptance, so
Yeah.
what's that phase once you're in the acceptance phase?
Well, I think that's going to be the phase that is probably sort of the longest. I mean, I've been accepting now of MS for about, 29 years. And although some days are better than others, back to this analogy of the garden, and I write this in the book, there was one day that I'll never forget it. I was sitting there, still, not ambulating without a device. I was still kind of walker cane phase. And I remember, having a lot of sorrow in my heart. And at that moment, I was like, look, just like this ugly weed in your garden, you have to accept that this is you, that this is the new you. And instead of looking at this as like this external thing, you need to I needed to like reach down and hold Brenda MS, her hand, and incorporate her into me and my soul and make us one. Weed the garden and then see the beauty in the garden, even while holding MS's hand. And when I did that, and it wasn't like overnight, but I had that thought and then just thought, so how do I make this part of me feel like me? That became the journey to me accepting how I looked different, how I walked different, how all of those things. And it started to repair my heart, started to repair my psyche. And that was really a pivotal shift for me. And I would say for everybody listening, acceptance, I think, is a time for you to find hope and a time for you. I like to say that hope is possibility. And for me, I'll even go the next step. Hope, I think, speaks to that you have choices in front of you. And when you feel that you don't have any choices in front of you, really hard to stay grieving and angry. So acceptance is a lot. It takes a lot of self work, and your family is going to need to accept this too, which is a whole other. There's stuff in this book for care partners, but I've now had many people say, please write one just for us, because this kind of needs to happen in tandem, right? So you're getting to this place of acceptance, but if your biggest support systems, or if they're still back in the grief and anger stage, now you're setting yourself up for potential more challenging times, conversations, dysfunction. So that's also really important, is to have your care partner in this case sort of be on the same time frame that you are. Not always easy.
So you mentioned care partners, and the book is as much a guide for care partners as it is for patients. And you share how common it is for care partners to put their own needs, their emotions, their dreams aside, and
Yeah.
really just give everything over to looking after the patient. So how does a care partner keep their own identity through that storm? And what role should the patient play to ensure that their
Yeah.
care partner doesn't lose sense of themselves?
Great question, Jeff. So the first thing is, for all the care partners out there, you got to let the guilt go. You got to let the guilt go. You've got to not feel bad if you can't show up 150% all the time, because it is impossible. It is impossible. And for you to bring to this relationship your own joy, sense of self, endurance, you need time to protect the things that make you you still. So if that's, going out with your friend, if it's doing a sport, if it's sitting alone and taking an hour to read, whatever it is, you have to protect that time for you and have, again, a courageous conversation with the person who is diagnosed with something. This doesn't mean that I don't love you. This doesn't mean that I don't want to care for you. This doesn't mean that you're not super important to me. What it does mean, if I can protect these pieces of myself, I'm going to be able to show up for you even better. Because if you don't have that, I've seen it too many times. That's where a lot of resentment has set in for the care partner. Again, anger that they can't get out of. How the hell did this happen to my life too? And I'm the one stuck doing double the work, and, so on and so forth. So very important. You leave guilt behind. You protect the things that make you wonderful and special, and the hobbies that you love, and don't be afraid to have a conversation about it. That's the one thing I found. You have to be vulnerable. Nobody's a mind reader. Well, maybe there's a few, but at the end of the day, you have to be vulnerable. You have to be able to speak up, find your voice, and share together.
So the next thing is, we're talking about lifelong conditions here. So one of the things you'll need to deal with that is endurance. So what would your tips be to build that endurance to live well with a lifelong condition?
Yeah, I say this a lot. You're going to find out that you're like the new Ernest Shackleton, right? It's a lot of endurance, and maybe you're captaining a boat that you never thought of. So I think the main thing is it's sometimes it's overused, it's a little too buzzworthy, but be kind and gentle to yourself. You're going to have some bad days. Again, normal. You're going to have some great days. And when you have a bad one, you might be back mourning that and grieving again. So endurance is really about, I think, too, the structure around you for success. So I think if you've worked some of these emotions, if you and your people, I like to say, are in a good place, you just have to know that it's going to take a while to endure. I endure very different at 30 years than I did at 25 years. My endurance looked different. I had to take a nap every day. I needed time to rest. I couldn't do some of the things that I can do today. So this is also okay. So Don't put too much pressure on yourself. Allow yourself to have the good days and the bad days. Be confident in your care plan. Don't be afraid to ask for help. And it's very simple. Find joy and happiness in the small things. To endure, for me, being able to finally get out of bed and make my 5-year-old a piece of toast to go to school. I mean, I still get weepy eyes and goosebumps on my arms because it was the first effing thing that I had been able to do in 2 years. And it's still one of my proudest moments, that I got to that place and that I could see the beauty in that moment. So I just really think stopping and giving yourself that pat on the back and saying, yeah, I endured this. Just enduring the diagnosis in my mind makes you a rock star. So, kind of own that and be proud about it.
And as a final question, you recommend that people look for ways to have an impact on the world, even though they have a chronic illness. So firstly, could you describe what you mean? And secondly, what do you think and hope your own legacy is and will be?
Great question. Well, I think I started this interview off by talking about how much I believe in, narrative storytelling. And if you look at, why we like stories, it's nobody giving you a lecture. It's you reading something that deeply touches you. And we know that the way our brain takes in complex information and understands the parable better is in the form of the story. I mean, before we even had written word, people were writing pictograms down. So I think every person that is living with a chronic illness can make an impact by just being open to sharing your experiences with somebody else. It is so powerful. Like I said, I'll never forget, not being able to speak Japanese and having those experiences because we were sharing. So that's something very simple. Give of yourself, give of your time. I think you can make an impact again in very small ways. I think for a lot of patients I've talked to over the years, philanthropy has meant a lot to people and the art of giving back. And that is something you will never know the impact that you made. You really won't. I can tell you it'll come back to you tenfold as well. So, and I think another way to maybe leave an impact is trying things you thought you couldn't do. There's a lot of power in that too. So I've tried some things I never thought I could do, and I did them. And that just raised me up, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, so much more than giving up. And then, what my legacy is, I just hope that through my work, whether it's my philanthropic work, the book, the company that I founded, that the people's lives that I touched know how much they touched mine very deeply. And I hope that, those experiences just to continue to pay it forward. That's really all I want. My legacy would be this, is for people to know they're not alone. They're not alone.
Okay, and that's a very good ending. And thank you very much for joining us, Brenda Snow.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Living Well with MS. Please check out this episode's show notes at overcomingms.org/podcast. You'll find useful links and bonus information there. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And please rate and review the show to help others find us. This show is made possible by the Overcoming MS community. Our theme music is by Claire and Nav Dean. Our host is Jeff Alex. Our videos are edited by Lorna Greenwood. And I'm the producer, Regina Beach. Have questions or ideas to share? Email us at podcast@overcomingms.org. We'd love to hear from you. The Living Well with MS podcast is for private, non-commercial use and exists to educate and inspire our community of listeners. We do not offer medical advice. For medical advice, please contact your doctor or other licensed healthcare professional.